Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. My name is Laura Madsen. I'm the Healthcare Practice Leader for Lancet. Today we're going to be talking about a checklist for healthcare business intelligence, and it is actually the fourth of a series that we have gone through the past few months on healthcare business intelligence. So today we're going to actually review the series at a really high level and talk about some of the key learnings that we had as a result of those, of each of those separate webinars. And then we're going to determine the list. And the list really is that checklist that we're talking about of what you need to do in order to get started or to get restarted with healthcare business intelligence. We're going to prioritize those activities because that's very important. What you do and when you do it is critically important from that perspective. And then, of course, we'll summarize our activities. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, feel free to enter it into the chat section in the bottom there and send that right to me, and we'll be answering those questions at the end of the webinar. And if for any reason you can't hear, have any other difficulties, you also enter it right there and we'll try to take care of that for you. So the other webinars in this series, the first one we titled Born This Way, and it was really talking about how healthcare business intelligence is fundamentally different than any other business intelligence activities that you do in other industries. And what we really learned in that is that there's two sides of the coin for healthcare BI. And what I mean there is that providers are not as far advanced from a business intelligence perspective as payers are. Payers are a little bit further down the path for this work than the provider side of the healthcare organizations. And with ACOs, that conversation is really being forced amongst those two entities, and I think providers are starting to feel a lot more pressure. Certainly meaningful use is driving some of that pressure as well, where we're seeing that data repositories are becoming more and more important for us to do our regulatory reporting. But then once we have those data repositories, we're wondering what we do with them next. The spirit of the requirements for meaningful use stage 2 clearly articulate that we should be tracking our populations, and that's not something that comes naturally to transactional systems such as EHRs. So we're all sort of looking to these data repositories now to be able to do that kind of work. So we have lots of regulatory pressures, lots of new things happening within healthcare, and a new push towards this data management perspective. And because healthcare is so different from a regulatory perspective, we really are sort of born this way, if you think about it like that. We're just different. Healthcare is very different. So one of the things that we focused on in that webinar is this idea that we really need a fair amount of healthcare experience. We also need to rely on vendors that have a fair amount of healthcare experience, so we can recognize, so that they can recognize for us that the ways that healthcare is different, so that we're not spending a whole lot of time on the learning curve, if you will, for healthcare. So the second webinar we did was garbage in, garbage out. It was actually about ETL. It wasn't about garbage at all. It was about the data that we deal with in healthcare. And you know, I've worked for quite a while in this industry, and I've always specialized in healthcare, and I've had the pleasure of working with some very prominent people in the business intelligence and data warehousing industries. And I remember one very prominent person saying to me once over the phone, he's like, I don't do healthcare. The data's too messy. I don't like it. So it's very interesting that this person, very well respected in the industry, had just said, you know what, I don't want to do healthcare data at all. And there are lots of reasons why our data is so messy. Transactional systems are created for clinical workflows, not for getting data in for reporting. And we certainly don't want to interrupt any workflow from a clinic perspective to make sure that we get good data on the back end. The first and foremost focus for all of us should be on appropriate patient care. So with a limited ability to modify our transactional systems, that really means that the data that we get almost exclusively is pretty flawed. And that sets us up right away. And then we have some pretty complex business rules in healthcare, way more complex than most other industries. If you think about a typical claim record has something like 150 rows of data, and those 150 rows actually equate to one claim line. The average end user doesn't really understand the subtleties there. So there's a lot of business rules that we have to apply in order for us to make these data useful from a broader user perspective. And that's really the goal of data warehousing or business intelligence. So we're dealing with that, and that's what garbage in, garbage out means. If you really, if you're really not careful, you can be putting garbage into your warehouse and really jeopardizing long-term user adoption. So ETL is critically important from a healthcare perspective. And then the next webinar we talked about was laying the foundation, and that's really about data modeling in healthcare. And those two, I specifically called out data modeling and ETL because I feel strongly that you need to be able to invest in those kinds of activities for healthcare. We talked a little bit in that webinar about my personal experience with a poor data model that led to an audit by the FDA and a nearly multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And if you want to hear more about that story, you can check out the webinar on our website, lancetsoftware.com, under Resource Center. But what I can tell you from personal experience is that structuring the data for usage is critically important for us as we look to broadening the usage to lots of other users. So we need to be able to structure that data so that the average end user can consume it and not be looking at something like 150 rows of claims data. And that it's really structured for reporting usage so that those reports respond in a reasonable amount of time. And not only that, but we're presenting these data in a very visually impactful way, such as dashboards, so that all of our users can really consume these data and make better business decisions. So in laying the foundation, we talked a lot about how do we go about starting a data model, and who do we rely on, and can we do it in-house, or do we have to hire a consultant, or can we do a hybrid version of those two things? And so those were the three webinars that sort of led to this one, which is a checklist, and really meant to pull all of those pieces together and say, what do we do first? How do we get a program up and running? And that kind of a thing. So in review, healthcare is special. We're all special, but healthcare is special. And data is messy, and healthcare data in particular is very messy. But we have to remember that value is really critical for business intelligence programs. We have to be delivering value every week, every month, because so much of the work that we do is what is termed below the waterline, right? It's that work that you do in data modeling or ETL that isn't immediately obvious to your end users. So you really have to make sure that you're providing as much valuable content to end users as possible. Usability and scalability are key. They are the reason that you do a data warehousing project. If you aren't really worried about scalability, in other words, appropriate performance regardless to how many users you have on the system, and if you're not really worried about usability, and usability in this context is this idea that many users can have access to the data and it's all defined the same way. And a good example of that is you ask a question, and no matter who runs the report, everybody gets the same answer. And that's really about usability of that data. If you're not worried about those two things, then a data warehousing project or BI program is probably not something that you'd have to invest in right away. But if those two things pop up to the top of your mind as to why you would want to do something like this, data warehousing and BI is the way to go. And we also have to keep in mind that doing things in the right order is really important. It's really critical. We have to make sure that we have some structure in place organizationally to start adopting business intelligence and the deliverables that it will bring forth, but also an engine in-house so that we can create this valuable content and push it out to our end users. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So we know that data is flawed and people make that data. So we have to keep in mind that ETL will be important. We have to keep in mind that we always should be delivering value. We have to keep our eye on that value ball, as it were. Here's our usability and scalability. So we have to make sure that if we want this program to succeed, that we ensure that the data is usable from a broad perspective and scalable from a performance perspective. So now what? And how do we do these steps, and how do we do them in the right way? So the first step, in my opinion, is to create a steering committee. And you may already have a group of senior leaders that get together every week or month. And what I would recommend is you sort of hijack their agenda. If they meet weekly, then hijack it once a month. If they meet monthly, then you'll have to find time to get on their agenda every month. And ask them to help you by being a steering committee for your program. And this does a couple of things. One, it sort of guarantees sponsorship from a broader perspective. It's important to have a sponsor, but it's really ideal to have more than one. And sponsorship will help drive adoption. It will certainly help you get funded. But it's important to have more than one sponsor, because if one person leaves or changes roles, you're not left without a sponsor. You're not left without an evangelist or without somebody that can sign the check. So really creating a steering committee with a whole team of sponsors is a really great way to go. Most organizations already have some level of meetings that go on at a senior level or a more senior level. Just adapt that. Don't create new bureaucracy for this exercise. That'll just frustrate people. But if you can get them to understand that data is an asset to the organization, and then you just ask them to participate with this by adding to their agenda for the steering committee, that's a really great way to get started. The other thing that's really important from the steering committee perspective is that we're going to ask them to prioritize what we do and when we do it. And we're going to have to come up with a list, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then what you want is a very diverse group of people at a leadership level telling you what to do and when to do it. What you don't want is you individually at a desk deciding what you're doing and what you're doing first, second, third. Because what you'll end up being in a situation a lot of time is defending yourself for the choices that you made, and you don't want to be in that situation because it's just distracting. So if you rely on this steering committee to prioritize your work, that's a really great way to get started. Now, that doesn't mean that steering committee is going to prioritize your work for the rest of time. It just really means that it's going to prioritize your work until you get a rhythm down and people start to understand how things are done and in which order they're done. And once that happens, that prioritization sort of takes on a life of its own. But those are the two main reasons why you want a steering committee. The next thing you really want to do is identify a goal, or preferably a number of goals. And the goals should be really attainable, right? We don't want to say something like, I want a world-class BI program. That's a great vision, but that's not a goal. It's not an objective. It's not something we can reach in the next 6 to 8 weeks or within a few months. So what we want is a handful of achievable goals that we can point to and say, we did this. So maybe one of your goals is you're going to create a meaningful use tracking dashboard, right? You've already met the meaningful use requirements from a reporting perspective, but now you want to create a dashboard that tracks those metrics over time so you can see how they're doing, so there's no surprises at the end of the reporting year. So that's something that since you already have all that data anyway, you should be able to create that meaningful use tracking dashboard. And that's a great goal to have right away. And then maybe the next goal that you have is, I'm going to create a series of operational reports or operational dashboards for our executives to use. And you create a handful of goals. Maybe your goal is, I have 100 report requests in my queue, and my goal is to get that down to 50 report requests within the next 6 months. It's something like that, but it's very attainable, and it's something you can point to say, yes, we achieved this. And then you set up the queue. And when I say set up the queue, I mean you find out what your list of requests are. And a lot of organizations, they sort of have a sense that it's there, but they don't really have a good sense of the volume of it. And they couldn't pull it out for you generally and say, here's my list of reports or my reporting queue. At least none of the organizations I've ever worked with has been able to do that. I'll ask for it. It takes them a couple days to pull it together, and then they're able to. But what this really does is it does a couple of things. If you can create this list, then number one, you know how big the work is, right? Number two is, as a general rule, as you're creating this list, you're going to learn a couple of things about each of these requests on that list. And then you'll be able to identify how big your gap is from what you're doing today from a reporting perspective and what you want to do in the brave new world of business intelligence. So let me explain that a little bit. As you're gathering this list of things that are requests, let's just call them requests. You're gathering these list of requests. What I recommend is that you ask each person that's submitting these requests to answer a couple of questions. And those questions are derived around two categories. The first category is business value, and the second category is ease of implementation. The business value is really about what value does it provide to you, business user, and why are you asking for it? So is this a regulatory thing? Is a customer asking for it? Is an auditor asking for it? Is there a way that we can create this without doing a full report request? So is there a workaround? Is there more than one customer asking for it? Because that implies a broader value. Is there a new service or product that we're trying to provide that this report addresses? So those are business value questions. Don't ask more than 10 of them, but ask those questions, and they should be very business focused. Does it align with our strategic vision for the organization? Whatever makes sense for you. Then from an ease of implementation perspective, this is a little bit more of an IT thing, but you can ask a couple of questions there that will get to the ease of implementation. Number one, is the data available? A very simple question. They will likely know the answer to that. They can say, I don't know, and then you'll have to track it down. But usually business users are asking for something because they've received it before, and they know how that request got completed. So they may say no, they may say unknown, but that's an important understanding for you to have. So does the data exist today is a big question, because that will imply, if it doesn't exist, that there's a fair amount of complexity in trying to get new data into your system. Ask them, do you get it today, and ask them to show you a copy of how they've received it in the past. So maybe you have two different departments. I see this a lot, where one group is responsible for ad hoc reporting, but if you want it more than once, you have to go to a separate reporting group. Well, take a look at what that ad hoc reporting group did. They usually have access to different types of data. They can usually build in some pretty sophisticated queries, so you can actually determine how big of a gap that is. From how you do it from an ad hoc perspective versus how you productionalize a report. So those are the kinds of questions that you ask to determine ease of implementation. And what you do is you put these two data points onto a quadrant, right? It's just like any other magic quadrant that you've seen. And on one side of the axis you have business value, and on the other side you have ease of implementation. And what you want to do is plot out each of these requests onto this quadrant and make the quadrant that has low value but high complexity be red, and the quadrant that has high value but low complexity be green, and then the other two correspondingly should be yellow and orange. Anything that's green should be quite literally green lighted, right? You just go to work on that because there's a high business value and it's pretty easy to do. So you start working your list, start working your queue. Anything that's red should be purposefully put on hold, because that generally means that you don't have access to these data, and those requests are fodder for why you need to create a data warehouse. Anything that's orange and yellow needs to be prioritized by your steering committee. And so that's how you work through that. But the only way that you can get that level of knowledge is if you work through and create this list of requests, or this queue. And then you have to project manage it. A lot of organizations I work with just ignore this part, and I think it's really important, because what you want to do is create or set up an engine in which you are have the ability to deliver valuable content all the time. And if you can do that with your existing resources, both people resources as well data resources, and get that engine running, you'll easily be able to start throwing in a more BI best practice perspective into that engine than if you don't have the engine running at all. So really project manage that queue, right? Get those green projects into a list, get people working on them. Get those orange and yellow ones prioritized by staff, prioritized by your steering committee, and get those into the queue as they come up after the green ones get worked on. And you just kind of keep working through that list like that. So now that you have that engine set up, and that has really nothing to do with BI per se, it has everything to do with how your organization is structured and how you can get working right away. The next thing you need to focus on is data governance. So this frightens a lot of people when we talk about data governance. I hear a lot of feedback about bureaucracy and that my organization just does not have time for that. And I totally get that, but I'm not a big proponent of really bureaucratic, really large data governance functions, because I do think that they just get in the way of the work that has to be done. I think it's critically important, though, that you understand that because our data in healthcare is so messy, and because we can define a member or a patient 13 different ways, it's really important that we govern our data as a corporate asset. And we have to do that actively. Data is very much like water in a flood. It will go to the lowest lying area. It will highlight process breakdown. It will certainly show you where things aren't going well. And you have to actively stay on top of that in order to make sure that your data is in the data warehouse is of high quality and sort of certified, if you think about it like that. And the only way to do that is through a strong data governance function. So the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And what I would say is, once you have your engine up and running and you have your prioritization from your steering committee ready and rolling, and they start to get a good perspective of how this kind of work happens, then you start talking to them about data governance and if they would be willing to share with you some more time to help govern the data. That steering committee, if it's at a higher level in your organization, is really the data owners. So what you want to do is ask them to identify the data stewards, so the people that in their organizations, within their departments, really knows that data inside and out. Those people that other people go to and ask questions about the data all the time. They generally don't self-identify as data stewards, but that's the function that they provide within your organization. So you create this group of data stewards, and they're responsible to make sure that that data within the warehouse is defined appropriately and is being used appropriately. So the easiest way to do this is on a project-by-project basis. So now that you have your list of orange requests and your list of red requests, now you know which ones to tackle that are a little bit harder. You can get the data steward group working on those to identify how you define the data, where the source data is coming from, particularly if you don't own it, how do you get it, that type of a thing. And you start that work on that side from project management perspective. You get those data stewards working on how do we define the data, where do we get it from, what are parameters of acceptable use or acceptable data within each of those data fields. So the data steward group is critically important from a data governance function. I would tell you that at this point in your journey of 1,000 miles, you have your steering committee and you have your data stewards, and that's it. I wouldn't go too far out into building out a big data structure, a data governance structure in the beginning. Now I can tell you that lots of organizations, once they get past this, create chief data stewards or senior data stewards. Then they have application data stewards and all of that. You can do all of that. But in the beginning, in order to stay really dynamic and agile and keep your BI program humming along, what you want to do is have a small group of people that are highly committed and that can focus on these projects as they come along one-on-one. So one of the most interesting things from my perspective in this work is that our work is really about providing a mirror back to the organization about how our data is reporting how we're doing, right? It's a report card, so to speak, on whether it's the cost and utilization or which services we're providing, or how each physician is doing with their panel, or that kind of a thing. It really is a mirror back to our organization and our users of how we're doing. But one of the interesting things for me for BI programs is that BI programs almost never show a mirror on themselves. They never set up or plan to do program evaluation for their own BI programs. So here at this point, what I'm recommending is that you set up a method to evaluate your own program. And all I mean by that really is to answer one very simple question, and that is, what does success mean? So if you're successful with implementing a business intelligence program in your organization, what does that look like? What does that mean to your business users? What does that mean to your executives? What does it mean to the organization overall? And break that out into objectives that you can handle in a month or a quarter within this year. And evaluate yourself really objectively against each of those objectives and then the broader vision. And then advertise that as much as possible. Give yourself a report card each month or each quarter. See, the thing about BI programs is that they're expensive. Whether you consider it expensive from a time, resourcing perspective, or money in the perspective, they're expensive. And in order to make sure that the organization is getting the most value, again, I'm back to that value thing, but to make sure that the organization is getting the most value for their money, you have to show it, you have to prove it. And the easiest way to do that is to set up a method of evaluating the program before the program even gets started. And just answer that simple question. Answer, what does success look like? So now that you sort of know what success looks like, you have data governance function that's starting to get up and running. What a next good step is to inspect your foundation. And what I mean here is, what do you have today, and how do you do the work today? And take a really candid look at that. And it's sort of this idea of doing a current state, and then you do a future state, and then you'll be able to do a gap assessment. So take a look at what you have for a data model. Is it really structured for usability and scalability? Does it follow best practices for data modeling? Whatever best practices you follow, that's a different webinar. But does it follow a best practice perspective? Do you have all the things that you need from a modeling perspective, and do you feel comfortable that your model can take you to the next phase? And be really fair about that evaluation from your data model. If you don't have a data model, then maybe the answer is pretty simple, that you're not, then you know that you have a gap. Then you take a look at your ETL, right? How is your ETL structured today? Do you have a standard method for ETL? Do you use a product, or do you use stored procedures or DTS packages or that kind of a thing? And does your ETL, is it married well with your data quality? Are you applying business rules via these ETL packages, and are you making sure that all the data that lands in your warehouse is of high quality based on business users' perspective of high quality data? And those are the things that you want to look at as you are inspecting your foundation. You really have to have a very objective view of what you're dealing with today in order to determine how you get to the next step. Now, you could bring in an outside resource like a consultant to help you with this, to be able to take a look under the hood, so to speak, and make sure that you have all of the things that you need structurally to move forward. But what you really need at the end of the day is that gap assessment, that list of things that you know you don't have today but need to have in order to take you to your future state of having a BI program. And then you have to be willing to invest. So up to this point, we haven't said anything about products. We haven't said anything about new people, new teams. In the last one about inspecting your foundation, I did say you may want to bring in a consultant for that. But really, up to this point, it has been an internally driven, very focused initiative on getting yourself internally ready for a BI program. But you do at some point have to invest, and that investment doesn't always mean 6 or 7 figures. I can tell you that the vast majority of the work in a BI program comes down to the people. So you're going to have to invest time, your internal resources, and these are usually the resources that are the most busy because they're the folks that understand your data. And that's going to make it really hard in the short term. There's no question that those folks will be busier in the short term, but in the long term, it's really about that scalability, right? And it's about broadening out that user base so that it's not just a handful of people that know the data and know the systems really well. It's really about a whole bunch of people being able to access a user-friendly system, and they can get their own information rather than having to go to a team of 2 or 3 people. So I recognize that the investment part is really hard. All of our budget cycles are challenged, but you will have to invest a little bit. During that gap assessment, one of the assessments you could make is, do you need new products? Do you need new tools to do this work? The 2 tools that generally come up are the ETL tools and the BI tools. This isn't a webinar where I recommend products to you. I can tell you that there are plenty of products out there that do a fine job, and it doesn't require a big investment. But you also have to consider what you want to do. You have to look back to that goal that we said in step number 2 is, what is your goal? And if your goal is really highly sophisticated dashboards that are delivered through an iPad, you're not going to get that for free, right? And if you know that your budget cycle is going to be challenged, maybe that's not a goal because you don't want to set yourself up for failure. But just know that at some point in the future you will have to invest in this program in order for it to be successful. So we talked about project management already, and that's this idea that I have this list of projects, this list of requests that I have to push out, I have to push through my engine. But once you have a data governance function up and running and you have data stewards and you have your steering committee, you maybe have a team that's doing this and inspecting the foundation and creating your gap assessment, and then you're going to potentially be going out and looking at products maybe through an RFP process. You really are bordering on the program perspective, right? You have a lot of moving parts. You're going to have a budget that you're dealing with. So you really need to start managing BI as a program, and what that means is balancing those resources across all of those separate projects or all of those separate entities like the steering committee and the data stewards and the RFP and the gap assessment, and making sure that all of those projects are running smoothly, that they have the resources that they need, and you can calibrate resources as need be. You can't do that if you exclusively have a project management view, because that project management view really means you have to put your blinders on and get this one project done or this one request done. Whereas program management is a much broader perspective where you are able to sort of juggle all of those resources around to make sure that each of these different entities are well resourced and are getting what they need and moving on. And then one of the least popular things that I think most BI folks don't want to do, and that's because most BI professionals are recovering IT professionals, and that is you have to market your BI program. You have to tell people what you're doing, why you're doing it, and when you do a really good job at it. And this is critically important in the era of challenged budgets and doing more with less. You have to be out there being a cheerleader and an evangelist for your BI program every day, every hour, every week, every month. The easiest way to do this is to set up a method in which you market your program frequently. One of the good things, if you follow these rules, if you follow these steps, you're going to have a couple of things set up. You're already going to have your engine set up, right? You're already going to have a broader goal set up. You're going to have a program evaluation method set up, so a method in which you evaluate yourself against those goals and objectives. So you have all of those things already set up within your BI program as you're getting started. So take advantage of those and start to market some of that information out to your broader end user base. Start telling them about what the data stewards are doing and how they're doing it. Start talking to them about the new reports that are being provided, or the new product that you're purchasing, or the new dashboard deployment via iPad, or whatever it is. But every time there's something that's a little win, get out there and make it known that the team did this and the value is being provided to X and such for this kind of a thing. And that's really important long term. Because if you keep your BI program sort of under wraps and you're just delivering great content out to folks, somebody's going to eventually look at the bottom line and wonder where all that money is going. And that's, again, money in people and money in products. And the thing is because BI is an enterprise function and you're providing all of this value out to the broader organization, if you don't have lots of exposure and visibility, transparency to what you're doing across the organization, people are only going to see their part of what they get. And that's not going to equate to the bottom line number, right? So you have to make sure that it's really well known what you're doing, and you're doing it for lots and lots of people. And then you just repeat. You just keep going down this list and you keep repeating it. And as you get really good at this work over time, some of these things will drop off, right? You won't necessarily have to be always going back and asking your steering committee to prioritize the yellows and the oranges. As you start to add more data into your data warehouse through data warehousing projects, you'll have fewer and fewer red requests that end up in the red quadrant. As you get really good at the data governance piece, and your data stewards are working really efficiently, that work will become less and less. In the beginning it'll be a lot, but as you continue to go through this work, it'll be less and less. So the important thing is you just kind of work this list and you keep working it and you keep going back and starting at one, rinse, lather, repeat, rinse, lather, repeat, until you feel like your BI program is really down to about 5 steps. And everybody knows the value and there's no question of ROI, and that's really the mecca. Really, that's where we all hope to be, the nirvana of BI programs. So again, quickly, I forgot to add in I forgot to put in the goal one, but so you create a steering committee, right, and you set up the queue of work. Then the next one is you pick a goal, right? You set a goal or a set of goals and objectives. Then you project manage your queue. You set up your data governance structure. You create a program evaluation method against those goals and objectives you've already identified. You inspect the foundation of how you do things today to determine that gap assessment. You plan to invest in that, again, people as well as products, potentially. You program manage it because you got a lot of stuff going on by the time you get to this step. And then you market your program. And then you just keep repeating that over and over again until things start to flow all by themselves. Okay? So as I was talking here, it looks like I got a couple of questions. So the first question I got, I think after like step 2, was, can I do these things out of order? Sure, you can. And I'm guessing most of you probably already have some kind of BI program up and running, so therefore you will be sort of already doing them out of order. But the logic as to why they're structured this way is so that you can have a team that's sort of up and running, getting stuff pushed out, and then you create this data warehousing exercise on the other side, and then you bring the two pieces together, right? And that really optimizes your ability to provide value out to your business users as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and that's really a key thing. So you can do it out of order, but that does put you in a potential situation of not providing a lot of value right away. So just keep that in mind. If you're doing them out of value, just always keep your eye on the value ball. And what you can do too is sort of step back and look at the steps and look at what you have, and maybe you just start at step 1, right? I mean, if you're dancing and you get out a step, what do? But you stop and then you just start at the beginning. So you could do it that way too. So the next question is one more important than the other. Nope. No, it really is about synergy. about how each of them work off of each other. So that's really what you want. There's not one that's more important than the other. All of these steps have to happen in order for you to be successful. And like I said, I really prefer to have these steps in this order. I guess you probably heard me say it 100 times already in the 40 minutes we've been together, but for me it really is all about value. So if I had to pick one, it's really about providing value to your end users, because if you do that, you're generally safe. So you can pick a whole different 10 steps if you want, but make sure that you are able to provide value to your end users. Next question, is there a right amount of investment? No, that really varies for every organization. If you've never had a reporting methodology before, you've never done formal SSIS or anything like that, then I would say that you're probably going to have, sorry, if you've never done formal ETL, gave away the bank on that one, didn't I? If you never had formal ETL, then you're probably going to have to invest a little bit more than somebody that has done some of this work in the past and has products in their toolbox already. There are products that are less expensive than others. There are ways that you can sort of stretch out your investment over a period of time so that it doesn't hit a capital budget really hard. So there are ways that you can do that, and honestly, if you can find a vendor that you trust and rely on them to help you through that, that's a really good way to do that. So another question about data governance: what amount of data governance is the right amount, and do we have to create a whole separate team? That is a tough question. I think you got your data stewards that are probably already really, really busy. And one of the challenges that you have is if they're already really busy, how do you ask them to do something else? And that's why I like this sort of project perspective of the small sort of achievable chunks. Like you pick one of the projects that landed in your red quadrant and you try to do that one first. It has to be small and achievable because people already have day jobs, and you want to make sure that you sort of get a little bit of practice before you start taking 2, 3, 4 projects on. So, in the beginning, I would say that your data stewards, if you can get them to dedicate half time to the data steward exercise, you'll be in really good shape. If you can't, and you need to create a whole separate team, then you'll have to do that. For the most part, I don't see a lot of my clients doing that. I don't see a lot of creating a whole separate team of data stewards. Most of us try to absorb the work, and generally what that means is it slows the work down because we can't, we don't have the opportunity to add a whole separate team and just speed work up. But I sometimes feel like slower and right is better than faster and wrong, particularly from a data governance and data quality perspective. So these data stewards, that work is really important to the success from a data quality perspective. So, and usually those people have been around for a long time and they have a very special knowledge of your product. So it's really critical that they be the people that do this work. So, data stewards are really going to be the lifeblood of your data governance function, and the right amount of those really depends on how many data sources you have and how much data you're going to be putting into your warehouse. And no, you don't always have to create a separate team from a data governance perspective in order to have a really highly functioning data governance work. And I think that was the last question I saw come through. So thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it. The other webinars that were part of this series are available at lancetsoftware.com under the Resource Center. You'll also find a blog out there. I'm not the only person that blogs, so you'll get a different perspective. We also just recently released, and this is my bad, we just recently released a new website, lancethealth.com, where you can go out and find information specifically about Lancet Healthcare and the work that we do in the healthcare space. If you want to follow me on Twitter, there's my Twitter handle. And just a warning, sometimes I Twitter stuff that's really not relevant to my work, but frustrates me about airports or something odd like that. I do write for the BI Network on the Healthcare Channel, and I have a co-host out there and try to get some articles out there every couple months. And coming soon is our Lancet Health site, so lancethealth.com. So thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it, and hope to see you all at the next webinar.